Hello, this is Joan Friedman, and this is Always for the Academy of Lifelong Learning on beautiful Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Here at Always, we like to inform our audience about our coordinators and our courses and um, the publications that we have. And what we like to do is to bring on our instructors to shine a light on them, on all the wonderful work that they do for us. They're all volunteers, and also to talk a bit about the courses that we offer here at the Academy of Lifelong Learning. Tonight, we're doing something really interesting. We have been holding a series called Hail the Historians, on which we've been inviting our coordinators of history courses to come and speak to us. And tonight, we're very fortunate to have one of our very valued coordinators, Pat Mckean, with us. Pat has taught many things for us at ALL, and hopefully she'll tell us about those. But tonight she's talking with us about her course that was called Daughters of Yalta. I got very interested in it just from the title. I have always been interested in the father-daughter relationships. I have a dad, and my daughters, had special relationships with their dad, and I got very interested in that and said, I don't know as I want to read another book about World War II, but this I have to read. And like every World War II book that I ever read, it was incredibly interesting. Could not put down interesting. So I'm delighted to have Pat here with us to talk to us about how she focused on that book and also the other things that she has taught for us at the Academy of Lifelong Learning. So, Pat, good evening. Thanks so much for coming on again with me.
Oh, good evening, Joan. It's just a pleasure to be here. And to start, I am one of the co-leaders of the Friends of the Sandwich Public Library book group. And we read Daughters of Yalta, and we had it for a 1 month discussion, which is about an hour and a half. And when the discussion was over, I just felt that there was so much more to talk about that we just didn't have time. And so we have a curriculum committee, and I asked them what they thought about my teaching a course for 6 weeks on the Daughters of Yalta. And they agreed it would be a good idea. And we've offered it twice now. And I'm not sure we've saturated the audience, but we didn't offer it for this semester, which just began on Monday. The other wonderful thing that happened was that Titcomb's Books had invited Catherine for one of their evening groups, and they gave me, Elizabeth Merritt at Titcomb's gave me her email, and I contacted her. And so for one of the 6 sessions, she actually joined us and told us.
Okay, excuse me, Pat. Could you tell our listeners who Catherine is?
Oh, Catherine Grace Katz, is the author of The Daughter of Yalta. She's a 30-year-old. At that point, she's now a little older, finishing her law degree at Harvard University. Just an amazing young woman. And so she agreed to come to one of our classes and answer all the questions. And what got her started on history was her grandfather. She would follow, when she was 5 and 6 years old, she would follow her grandfather around the house with a notepad. And she asked him every question that she could even think of. The other amazing thing is that she discovered through this book that the daughters of Harriman, Roosevelt, and Churchill actually invited them to join them in Yalta. No one really knew until this book was written that the daughters were there. They saw newsreels, they saw many things about the book, But it was these three young women who managed and listened and wrote letters and diaries, sometimes things that they weren't supposed to do. But we got to see through the book what it was like from a woman's perspective to be at that conference. And for all of us, we were either not born, some of the people in the class hadn't even been born. I was born in 1941. So in 1945, I was 4 years old, and I wouldn't have known anything that was going on in the world. But it was fascinating. I loved teaching it. As Joan said, I've taught several different classes. One is using children's literature to teach science, which is something that I love, and have developed a website that links those children's books to science activities. Then I taught a course, Would You Like to Know More About Climate Change? And right now, this semester, I'm moderating a course, Try a New Leisure Activity. I joined ALL when we first moved to the Cape in 2012, and it has become one of my passions. It's just a wonderful organization with so many volunteers who do so much for the community. And what we need, and this is what Joan is doing through this always, is to try to get our name out to the public, because it is amazing how many people you talk to and you mention ALL, and they kind of look at you and say, well, what is that and where is that? So it's hard for her to understand that not everybody knows about us.
Mhm. Um, Pat, could you tell us a little bit about who were the Daughters of Yalta? Who were they? Their dads? What roles they played there? Specifically, I'd be interested in hearing about Roosevelt's daughter, who was keeping a terrible secret while they were there. So, would you tell us a little bit about those daughters?
I certainly can. They were Kathy Harriman, Anna Roosevelt, and Sarah Churchill. And each one of them had a really special relationship with their dad. Anna was the only girl of the five Roosevelt children, and all her brothers had gone with FDR to different conferences, the Tehran conference, because the Yalta conference was the fourth, I believe the fourth now, conference where these world leaders met. And this was her first chance to go. Um, Joan, should I tell the secret?
I don't think it's a secret anymore, so I
Okay,
think it's okay.
okay.
It was then.
She was also the only one who really knew how sick her father was. Not even her mom knew that. Her mom was a little snubbed that she wasn't invited to go because she always went. But FDR said to her that, look, the other men are bringing their daughters. You would be a little out of place because people would think they would need to have to do some special entertainment for you. So Anna knew, and her job was to try to keep FDR as rested and as out of the spotlight whenever she could be out of the spotlight. Kathy Harriman had was the daughter of Averell Harriman, who was very involved in the Lend-Lease program. And he had gone to England to represent the United States in that program. And Kathy went along with him. And then he was transferred to the embassy in Moscow. And Kathy again went along. So she had learned to speak Russian. She had learned a lot of the ways of the Russians. She knew how to protect herself from certain things that might happen. And she also could understand some of the Russian spoken when the Russians didn't realize that she actually could understand.
Now,
And
isn't
then this,
she, yeah, isn't she the one, isn't Kathy the one that did all the advance work on preparing for Yalta? I remember the parts in the book with she was going into these what were fabulous mansions and castles, and they were unlivable, and she had to make them livable for the most powerful men on earth. Harriman, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin was also there. He didn't bring his daughter with him, but another one of the most powerful men on earth, and she had to prepare all of these buildings, try to get them back to their former glory. Could you talk a little bit about that?
sure, she and Avril arrived in the Ukraine, and this is what makes it even more drawing in where we are right now. The three residents of the three men, Stalin, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Harriman, the four, excuse me, were in a direct line on the Black Sea. And Stalin's residence was positioned between the other two. So to go from one to the other, they would have to pass his castle. And the Russians had succeeded in bugging the castles, which the Americans and the British thought was a possibility, but it comes out in the book just how many bugs there were. But when she arrives, her dad immediately goes to Malta and she's left behind. And she has to figure out how to put all these delegates into the residence. How many bathrooms? They would line up in the morning in a queue to use the bathroom. One of the delegates would jump up the bathroom in Churchill's palace had I forget what you call them, but it's the window above the door, so you can crack that window, but you really can't see in. I don't know the name of it. But this one delegate was so angry because the one person in there was taking too much time that he would jump up and scream into the window, "Time's up, get out." There were cockroaches, there were so many problems, and she managed to smooth over a lot of things, um, finding the right beds. These residents had been destroyed as the Germans retreated, and somehow she did it, and she did it with great grace.
She did it,
Um,
and and we didn't really know about that until recently. That's a tremendous amount of work. That's something that like the Department of State or something would get involved in today. And this young woman did that all on her own. But you touched on something too on um, that when I was reading the book, I knew where Crimea was. Yeah, I knew where the Black Sea was. I knew how close Russia was, because of the world situation now. And so that was it was interesting. It brought it into the present, of course, and then again, how much the agreements at Yalta created the world that we have grown up with. I was born in 49, so I was born after all of these borders were changed. But we can talk about that in a minute. What about Sarah? What about Sarah Churchill?
well, Sarah was she was another one that she followed her father around. She loved her father. She was a personality on the stage, but she would go on the weekends to Chartwell with her father. And one of the things Winston did to relax was build brick walls. And she would follow along. She would help with the plumb line. She would lay the bricks with him. And she just got to know him really well. And when it came time for him, for him to go, she went because her mother was totally afraid of flying. And so she went along, and she was just wonderful. And she was um, such an attractive young woman and had done so many things that Churchill was proud of her and was thrilled to have her with him.
Yeah, he did seem to be delighted that she was there, and she showed up in her RAF uniform. That's pretty
Right? Yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
That's that's pretty impressive for a young girl. I want to get back to a question though about President Roosevelt. Um, how soon after he got back from Yalta did he pass away?
He came back in February and he died in April.
Mm.
So, and Truman, who was his vice president, also did not have any idea how sick he was.
He was
So
really
there were
very
really secrets. Yeah,
he was
very.
very sick over there. Very
Yeah.
sick over there. Does and his daughter was trying to um, mitigate all of that and to not let the Russians know how ill her dad was for fear that they would play off of the president's
Yes.
weakness. So she was dealing with a lot, dealing with an awful lot besides just the fact that she loved her dad. She
Yeah.
loved her dad, and she didn't want to say no. Um, but we talked a little bit about what they actually did at Yalta. Could you tell us a little bit about, what agreements did they come to there?
Well, the one of the main agreements that they were working on was Poland and what would become of Poland. And the Polish government had pulled out and was in exile in England. And there was a local government that was still existing. And the Russians really wanted to deal with the local government because they said, well, the leaders are in exile in England and they're not even here. But Poland had been if you can look at a map, you will see that Poland is in between Germany and Russia. And so it had been a back and forth, like a football, tossing back and forth. First invaded from the west, then invaded from the east. And finally, in the end, the dividing line was the Curzon line. And you could see that the Polish people, once again, were left out of this. They also had to decide. There was a couple of times there was a meeting between Roosevelt and Stalin that Churchill didn't know about, and then there was a meeting between Churchill and Stalin that Roosevelt didn't know about. Roosevelt's main goal was to get Russia committed to enter the war against Japan. That was one of the things that he wanted. Churchill wanted protection for the British Isles because, as we remember from World War II, the D Day and the front on the coast of France was the final attempt for America and England to get, and France for that matter, to get into France and be able to move toward Germany. So there were many factors, and Churchill and Roosevelt had always been open with each other, fairly open. And in
Mhm.
this particular case, there were times when Churchill felt left out of what was going on and what decisions were being made.
Mhm.
The daily schedule involved a plenary session, which happened in the afternoon. And when they came out of the plenary session, there would be a huge meal with 10 courses and toasts and alcohol and really rich food. And that was the one thing that Anna had to protect her dad from. Plus, her dad really liked cocktails at 5 o'clock, and he wanted those cocktails. And because he didn't understand how sick he was, he had no idea. And and the question is, did he ever really realize how sick he was? And I don't think that question's ever really been answered.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, yeah, yeah, the thing that we can look at now, in our 2024 sensibilities is why do you think the roles of the daughters was so overlooked for so long? Yeah, as I said, Kathy Harriman set that whole thing up by herself.
Yeah.
Um, um, why do you think that sort of hasn't come to light uh, until until this author decided to take on this topic?
Well, I think part of it, and we still see that today, that how valued are women and how much did the world then think there was any importance in having them there? There were all these men, and men, of course, without sounding sexist, really think that they can manage things by themselves. And they kind of forget what's happening in the background. Um, was it just fate that this all happened? I mean, part of the reason Catherine was able to write the book is when one of her many jobs, she was working in New York City in a building, and in the lobby of the building were was the archives of all Churchill's letters and other things that they had gathered about him. And, and one day, when she was talking to the owner of the bookstore, he said, they have just released Sarah Churchill's letters." And so this was her chance. And she was asked to write a 500 word um, article about this. And when she opened the letters and started to read them, she realized that this is way more than 5,000 words. And that was the reason that she started to write the book.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah.
so
There always has to be those breadcrumbs for somebody to be left to follow. Um I was in such admiration of these three very young women in a very precarious situation and how they handled themselves. And I was interested to find out what they do with the rest of their lives. Yeah, who was willing to shine a light on them, and where did their lives go from there? You would have liked to have thought that that they came out of that and were given some credit for something. Could you tell us a little bit about what they do with their lives after that?
I don't know a whole lot about that, but I think Sarah, who you pointed out very nicely, that she wore her uniform in all the formal pictures, and she was very involved in the war in Africa. In fact, when Churchill commented one night about the number of ships and what was happening in the African movement, he said, I can't remember what the number, but whatever it was, let's say he said there were 306 ships going through the Straits of Gibraltar. She said 307. And he looked at her and said, how do you know that? And she said, because I'm the one that's been using and working on this particular campaign. So he goes back into the dinner and he tells that my daughter knows more about this than I do. Well, the British government went crazy and asked who had leaked this information. And when they were told it was actually Churchill himself, what were they going to do? Um, Pamela Churchill, whose lead has a part in a definite part in the book, actually ends up coming to America and marrying someone. Kathy, I believe, comes home and works on her father has this ranch in Aspen. She's an accomplished writer, and I really don't know too much about Anna
That
and what
that
happened.
that's the point that I was trying to get to,
Uh-huh.
is that they just went back to normal lives.
Yeah,
They just went back to their lives. And I think that's true for a lot of people in World War II.
yeah,
They could have had, played an incredible role, whether it was in Europe or Africa, or, or someplace Eastern, and came back and went back to the factories, went back to the farms, and didn't talk a whole lot about it. So
right,
again, so I don't think that that's that uncommon, but they certainly did have a remarkable skill set, that you'd like to think that maybe in another time, they could have been given credit for. But it certainly was interesting in that, as you said, they come back and there ended up being some marriages, and very, very interesting, very, very interesting. And as I said, my um I'm always I'm always amazed at how much um, I am taken by the stories of World War II.
hmm
Perhaps because, we always think we live in the worst of times. Well, we're not living in the worst of times. And that how they survived, through those incredible years, the people from England, the people from Russia, and one of the statistics in the book was how many Russian soldiers died in World War II, which vastly eclipsed,
yeah,
the other allies. And, I didn't know that. So, the Russians suffered a great
yeah,
deal
yeah.
too. And
Germany was very, very ruthless in what they did, and then to the point of the Russian prisoners that were captured and kept in Poland because at one point Russia decided that they must have deserted, they must have done certain things. These men, at that point, of course, they, all this basically the soldiers were men. They didn't want to go back to Russia because they knew they would probably be sent to Siberia or something like that. I mean, the fear factor and everything of what went on and what went on in the Ukraine and the famine and the fact that Moscow wanted to put up a solid front. So all these grains and things were sent to Moscow to build up their position, and the people of the Ukraine starved. And now, as we see what is going on in Ukraine, it brings so many of those things back. The in spending 6 weeks talking about this course, I just always had to figure out what I what I had time for and what I couldn't do. But we really did well to get through it. And I should say that because of my last conversation with Catherine Katz, that her next book is about the Hindenburg, and it's
Mhm.
coming out in, I think, 2025.
Mhm.
So I'm going to try to put my historian hat on and try to do another ALL course. So
Well,
we'll
well,
see.
you know that that ALL would be delighted, and that that there are enough of history buffs out there that I'm sure that they that it would be very popular. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Catherine Katz has a lot of YouTubes out there, if anybody is interested in seeing or hearing her, how she put this book together, why she put the book together. As Pat said, she's a very young woman, but she's brilliant and interesting. And so if anybody wanted to to know more about it, obviously the book is called Daughters of Yalta by Catherine Katz. But if you wanted to condense that, there are a number of really good YouTubes out there by her on on the topic of this book. So, um, Pat, just quickly, um, if anybody's watching or listening, that doesn't know much about the Academy of Lifelong Learning, what would you tell them? And would you tell them to get involved with us?
Of course, I would. I just moderated um, and did the first leisure activity, which is entitled "Would You Like to Tell a Better Story?" And we started this in the fall because, as life would happen, coordinators and members of the academy are aging. That's what happens. We join when we have to we you have to be over 50 to join, but then years go by quickly, and COVID really forced us to lose many members, and we are struggling to get those members back, and we're doing really well. But we have, of course, during COVID, we were blessed by Zoom. It was, if we hadn't had Zoom, I'm not sure that we
There
would,
would have been no had been no
yeah,
way, yeah,
no,
to
no way.
survive. Yeah.
But if you're not familiar with it, we have two classrooms and a reception area at the corner of Grossman Building on Cape Cod Community College, with a lot of handicapped availability because many of us, including me, are handicapped and we do need some help. So when we are now we are in full swing again. And so we have these two classrooms and we have an area where people can gather and talk. Cafeteria is back in business. You can go down and have a cup of coffee after. You can get some lunch. The But in our session on Monday, I looked around the room and I asked some questions. I saw six familiar faces, people that had taken the six courses in September and came back and explained that they were either looking for something to do. One person was recently retired. She said, "You can just clean out so many closets and cull so much stuff from your house. I'm here to see if I can relearn knitting because that's going to be one of the classes." And then we had five new people, new members to ALL, and that's our lifeblood. But you meet so many wonderful people. You establish friendships with people that have a lot in common with you and often have a lot we don't have a lot in common, but that's what life is all about. It's growing, it's being active as an adult, it's
Not
um
stopping,
not stopping. Yes,
not stop,
so
not
we're
stop.
not stopping. I can't recommend it highly enough. For our membership fee is $110, and for $110 you can take 4 6-week classes, 2 12-week classes, 1 12-week class, 2 6-week classes. And if the classes aren't full and you've already signed up, you can speak to the coordinator. Although now Jean DeVincentis helps us on the website, so you can actually find out after the first week what courses are not full. Could you sign up for them? I could go on and on and on. We had a coordinator, a wonderful man named Gersh Rosenblum, and he was a coordinator. Sadly, he's gone now. He was 99, and he taught at the academy until he was in his early 90s. And Kathy, his daughter, would take him to all kinds of appointments. And the first thing he would say when he walked into a doctor's office, when he walked into anything, "Now let me tell you about ALL." So it's where we are. Please join us if you're not. And I hope if we meet, you will introduce yourself, and you probably recognize me. As my kids have always said, "Mom, you're usually the tallest person in the room, and now you have a blue crutch to match your white hair."
Pat, thank you so much. Thank you so much for for coming on with me again. Um, uh, Pat and I talked once before about her first leisure course. Thank you so much for for your knowledge about World War II and the Daughters of Yalta, about sharing your skills and your knowledge with all of us. And Pat and I would like to thank you all very much for listening and watching. I'd like to direct you to our website, which is Cape Cod ALL, all one word, capecodall.org. We also have a Facebook page called the Academy of Lifelong Learning Cape Cod. We have a YouTube channel, and we you can watch us on channel 26, which is the local cable television on Mid Cape. We're on 11 o'clock on Monday mornings, and we're on at 6 o'clock on Thursday afternoons. So please turn in again. You can go to Cape Cod ALL and see all of our catalog, and also to try to sign up to get our newsletters, which would put you and make you informed of all of our important dates. So again, I want Pat, thank you so much, and I want to thank anybody who's listening and watching, and good night.